All right, so we are all set to begin our eagerly awaited panel discussion. I'll introduce all our three speakers and then we'll move on to questions and answers. First of all, this is going to be a CPU or a charging network developer's perspective, and we have with us Mr. Avdesh Jha, Mr. Maxine Lewis, and Mr. N. Mohan. So Mr. Avdesh Jha is Vice President, Photon Charge and Drive. He has been working with Photon since July 2014. Prior to this, he worked with the Ministry of Water Resources for 15 years, followed by 6 years at Hindustan Power Projects Private Limited. He has over 29 years of experience in the energy industry across the government and private sectors, brings with him first-hand experience in policy formulation, strategic planning, general management, business development, project development, PPP mode, land acquisition, environment and forest clearances, compliances, techno-commercial negotiation, asset management, establishing and running new businesses in the power sector by assuming leadership positions in private and government sectors. He's a graduate in civil engineering and holds an MBA for working managers from IIM Lucknow. Maxine Lewis is Managing Director and co-founder Magenta Group. He has project management experience in setting up power plants aggregating over 10,000 megawatt of capacity and has overseen capital expenditure of over rupees 45,000 crores. He has 18 years of rich experience in large-scale project setups and operations with global exposure. In the past, he's worked with several noteworthy brands such as Accenture, Management Consulting, Adani, Vedanta, Sterlite, etc. He's responsible for formulating the company's overall strategy, vision, and focus necessary for the brand to continue its pace of rapid growth and expansion. He has orchestrated strategic accomplishments in identifying and investing in next-gen technologies early on to ensure that Magenta Group stays at the forefront of technology innovation. He's a mechanical engineer by training and has an MBA. And then we have Mr. N. Mohan, who is Deputy General Manager and Head EV Charging Infrastructure at EESL. He has over 15 years of experience in policy planning, conceptualization and implementation of energy efficiency programs. He's leading EV penetration in the country through the deployment of reliable charging infrastructure. Under his guidance, Convergence Energy Services Limited, a subsidiary of ESL, has deployed more than 250 public charging stations, equivalent to 450 charging points, and has plans to deploy more than 5,000 PCS by the end of 2025. Prior to CESL, he worked with Forbes Marshall and Triveni Turbines Limited, Bangalore. He's a mechanical engineer by training with an MBA in marketing and international business. He's also certified energy auditor as notified by BEE, Ministry of Power. Welcome to all our very esteemed panelists. And now we are ready to begin with our panel discussion. To begin with, I would like each of the panelists to please make 5 minutes brief remarks on the experience that you've had over the years on the EV charging infrastructure uptake in your organization till now, number of stations, and the kind of business models that you follow. We can start with Mr. Jha first, and then Mr. Lewis, and then Mr. Mohan. Mr. Jha, on to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is very heartening to be part of this webinar. And I remember year 2015 or 2017, when I had for the first time on the India Infrastructure Forum, I had represented for my company. And at that point of time, the discussion was hovering around whether the EV charging is a service or a sale of electricity. And I also remember in the 2-day sessions, I had to be in the panel for 3 or 4 times. And at that point of time, since beginning, we were of the view that if EV has to be the mainstream in India, the EV infrastructure has to come first. I mean, there is no question of this artificially created chicken and egg story. The infrastructure has to come first because that would give the consumer a visual satisfaction that yes, if I get stuck anywhere or where do I get my vehicle charged, they will see those networks by their own eyes and then they will feel confident of buying the electric vehicle. And in order to happen so, this has to be decentralized. This has to be delicensed. And obviously, treating this as a sale of electricity would be doing a great disservice before this sector itself emerges. So from that day onwards, we have been doing this, and I think we are very happy that in 2018 April, Ministry of Power came out with these guidelines or the modification, I would say, through the office memorandum, that this will be a de-licensed activities and anybody can set up the charging infrastructure. So that sums up, I would say, the journey of this industry itself. That within a span of 1 year, the industry was able to convince the government that please start on the right note. Any misstep in the beginning would jeopardize the entire industry. So that is something which is very, very heartening. And from then onwards, the government of India has been doing a lot. So they have both on the policy front, either on the vehicle side or the infrastructure side, they have done their bit. There are, obviously there are certain issues in a country like India. We can't have the luxury of the European Union or the California and the Chinese, where the state dominates. We can't afford to have that luxury, but within the overall constraint, we have been doing, I would rate that we have been doing reasonably good. And then the foundation is set for having a good infrastructure in the country. As far as our journey is concerned, we started clearly in 2016, but then, as you can understand, being a government-owned majority state company in Finland, and coming from the Europe, we are slightly very meticulous. We don't start any business as it is. So we spend a couple of years understanding the Indian market, the automobile market, what is the likely potential. And in 2018, we set up our first commercial public charging infrastructure. And here I would like to mention very clearly that we have, as of now, we have very much clearly focused on the serving the four-wheeler passenger car segment. So in 2018, we started with the four-wheeler passenger car and in the public charging space as of now, because we believe India as a country should promote more and more public charging. The reason being very simple: from the national asset optimization point of view, 1 square foot of space, if it is used by as many cars as possible, that gives a better return than a 1 square foot of space is used by only one car. So India, as a country, we are resource constrained, we are space constrained, so we need to optimize the utilization of the space, and the public charging is the way in which you can go ahead. The another reason why the public charging should also be promoted is that 60 to 70% population, even in the urban cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, they do not have access to the dedicated garage. And this I'm talking about again, my all discussions, my narrative is around four-wheeler car segment. So they don't have the dedicated, the garage where they can park their vehicles. So it means they require at some place where they can put the vehicles and then charge it. Because in the ultimate scenario, don't think from the next 5 years or 10 years. See a scenario when inflection point arrives and electric vehicle becomes at par with the ICE vehicles and the operating cost is 20 to 30% than the ICE vehicles, then you don't have any incentive to go for ICE vehicles. So electric vehicle will be the mainstream. In that situation, if everybody is owning the electric vehicle, then they require certain facility to charge the vehicle. And those facilities can be either at home or at workplace or at a public place. But India as a country, as I said, that we don't have access to the dedicated garage. So those 60-70% people who's owning the car would require some space to get their vehicle charged. So that's where the public charging is very, very relevant for a country like India. And this is also reflected in a report of McKinsey, in 2018 when they had come out. They very clearly spelled out that in an emerging country like China and India, public charging plays an important role. And even if you go to the International Energy Agency's Outlook 2020 or 2021, they have also indicated towards that one that initially it will be home charging, because most of the time the vehicles would be adopted by those who are having a high power purchasing capacity, and they have incidentally the private garage also. But gradually the public charging space will occupy more place and than the private home charging. So overall the public charging, and that's where we have been putting our effort therein. So right now we are operating around 105 charging points and all fast chargers. In public place, we do not believe that there is a point of putting up an AC 001 which takes you around 7 hours, 8 hours, and nobody has a gut, I would say the patience to, stay in the public place for 8 hours and see their vehicles getting charged. So we are putting up the vehicle, the chargers of 50 kilowatt or 60 kilowatt or 30 kilowatt DC001 or the CCS sensor demo. So that has been our journey so far. In terms of the utilization of our charging, obviously it varies from place to place and location to city. But on an average, we have seen that the range is from 5% to 20%. So at some locations, you will find our charging station is having high utilization as high as 20%. And in some locations, it has 5% or less than 5%. But then this is a good, I would say, indicator, especially considering that we were struck by COVID for last 2 years. Initial phase of the COVID had impacted the sale of the electric vehicles. Last year only it has started picking up when one of the manufacturers came out with a reasonably priced electric vehicle, which could be afforded with the subsidies supported by state and under FAME 2. So now that has given a good impetus to the electric vehicle car adoption. And so this has been our journey. And besides that, we also, as many of you are aware, that we are also supporting other charge point operators if they believe, because we have more than 10 years tested, the software platform. Where, because in Norway, we are the largest operator and we have been operating there for since 2012. So we have a very credible software backend charger management systems along with the mobile applications. So that also we have been offering to the Indian market. One of the leading car manufacturers have been our customers. It was there for pilot purposes for a couple of years, where they use our platform to manage the entire charging infrastructure for the pilot purposes they had set up for their fleet. And this is because we believe that initial stage, the competition is not the mantra, the collaboration is the mantra. So we need to collaborate with each other. We need to learn from each other. And that's why I'm very happy the way the industry have been progressing, the way the people have been doing it, the job, and overall the customers have been showing their interest. And recently, I mean, I got to know that in one of the surveys, 60% of the willing, of the people who is contemplating buying a car, they have shown interest that they are willing to buy an electric car. Obviously, affordability is one of the criteria as of now, and the charging infrastructure, access to the charging infrastructure, is another criteria, which I believe, in a couple of years, this will be much better situations than today. And so I will take a pause here, and I'll be happy to have any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Mr. Lewis, your brief remarks, please, on the same, your growth over the years, the number of charging stations that you have, and what is your business model?
Right. I think Avdesh has mentioned it right. It's in the initial years, Avdesh had to attend all the panels. Now there are multiple panelists, and that's also a sign of the growth of the industry because more and more people are actually jumping into the fray. So I'll just build up two parts. One is since 2018, when we set up India's first solar-based EV charging station, that's the point we took. And we set up charging infrastructure on the Mumbai-Pune highway and also installed India's first EV filling meter. That was way back in 2018. And that was a time when the conversations were whether electric vehicles will sell, etc., when how quickly the industry would take off. And I remember conversations, Mohanji, Avdesh, we used to say, no, it is going to happen. Just trust us on it. Someone has to take that punt of it and move ahead. And today it is proven right. It was just waiting for the right parts of the ecosystem to fall in. And like I say, in the chicken and egg story, the people who make the omelette first are the ones who get it. So, so in that way, I think a couple of us took the first leap of faith, set it up. Well, what's happening right now? A couple of things are getting sorted very well. One of the things which people don't realize is the fact that charging is not a licensed business, which is one of the most important critical days in the entire EV ecosystem history, to be honest. I think that should become India EV Day rather than anything else. But then protocols was another question. Now protocols are getting sorted in place. We know the defining protocols which are falling in, or at least what the OEMs are actually going ahead with. And there's no more discussion about it. It's more of, hey, listen, I need to. And in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler space, the protocol, we believe that things are going to fall in place. So it's the right things are happening. Now about Magenta, of course, we started way back in 2018. We did the first foray into EV charging, and since then, what are we doing? We were initially seen as a classic charge point operator, but we realized that we cannot cut copy-paste solutions into India. We will need to Indianize them. So which also meant our involvement in manufacturing the hardware. We actually manufacture the AC chargers in-house. All the entire R&D, everything was done in-house. Possibly every piece and pie of that was designed by us. Then the second part was the software. We developed our own software, but we are more than happy to discuss interoperability and how, like Avdeshji said, it is not about competition. The competition is another few, if not a decade, a few years away. It's more about collaboration. Third part is the charging as a service continues to exist. So these are the three aspects of charging. Also, we have another entire service business line, which is the mobility platform, but I won't want to discuss here. That's under our EVIT brand. But at this point in time, in pure charging, there are a couple of interesting things that are happening. We are at this point in time deploying close to 1,000 chargers with one of India's largest fuel retail outlet. And these are not DC fast chargers, these are AC chargers. It's not about business here. It's about just making sure that people, wherever they go, they have that comfort that yes, they can go and charge their vehicle. Similarly, with under the FAME2 scheme, we are setting up close to around 2,900 chargers in 34 cities in India. But at the same time, we have, like Avdeshji said, his focus, Photon's focus is on the four-wheeler. We have kind of split that into two parts. One is the four-wheeler business, which continues to be the piece where it's the new vehicles which will come. But we realized that there is a three-wheeler segment, which is essentially the last mile mobility service providers. So we have an entire ecosystem created for them, where we work with e-commerce companies, and we've set up large charging hubs, if I were to call it, or we call it micro hubs. We've taken a city, just put it down there. And we realized that that is another growth area where charging can happen. And it dovetails us with our second business line, which is the mobility platform. So this is what interestingly we are doing and that's how it is. It's India, it's how you find a challenge, solve it, make business out of it. So I think we're still in the solving stage. The business is yet to happen. These are my opening remarks on what's happening in the EV space and about Magenta. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. N. Mohan, on to you now. We wanted to understand what is EESL's business model in this space and how many chargers has EESL set up and what are its plans going forward?
Sure. Thanks, Kushbu. Nice interacting with Mr. Maxon and Mr. Avdesh Chaji. So primarily, like EV started journey in 2018, and primarily we had a mandate for aggregating the demand for electric vehicles. That is when we launched this national e-mobility program, and primarily the intent was to bring demand for electric vehicles in the country. So at least we can encourage customers to switch from normal ICE vehicles to the electric vehicles. That's how we started the journey of electric mobility in 2018. And lastly, like we're more focused towards putting up these captive charging stations for the leased electric vehicles. But gradually we realized like unless we focus more towards deploying the public charging station, the adoption rate would not increase in cities. So during this course of like determining and refining the strategy for public charging stations, we work with some of the local municipalities, the distribution utility, development authorities, and metro corporations, where we work on typically on a revenue sharing model, where as a charge point operator, we take the ownership of the infrastructure and we operate it. And we use a typically pay-per-use model and with different variants for revenue realization. Typically, we share a portion of the revenue with the land partners. The entire investment is done by the company, so there is no upfront investment with the land partners. That is a unique business model we try to bring in to our stakeholders. This way, we have built up close to 370 public charging, fast charging stations, primarily for the electric four-wheelers in the heavy-duty segment. Broadly, if you look at, we have a strong policy in place right now, and there's a demand incentives for electric vehicles, and also there is an equivalent prominence has been given for the charging infrastructure. where under the central subsidy is allowed under the FAME2 scheme, and even the state which are coming out with the state EV policies, they're also like defining a percentage of state subsidy for charging infrastructure, which is encouraging, and also it's like bringing more investment in cities through the state EV policies. Broadly, the type of chargings depends upon the vehicle segment also, like unlike other countries where they have an unified charging protocol, but in India we have different charging protocols, and each vehicle segment, this could be for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, or heavy-duty vehicles. We have different charging technologies. One is like a direct charging, or this could be battery swapping solution also. And would compare when you analyze with respect to the applications. So we have different the home charging, the commercial charging, and the public charging also. So in India, we estimate there would be near about 400,000 charging points by 2030, considering the expected volume of electric vehicles on road. So even if I assume 30% of 4 lakh, so near about like 120,000 the public charging points have to be like established in order to ensure that the customers has an confidence for driving the electric vehicles across the length and breadth of the country. So we believe, I think India is in a leadership position as of now, and transforming India into a manufacturing hub for and localization of production for electric vehicles, the charging infrastructure, and also like and building the complete the value chain of electric mobility is much needed. To ensure like there is an larger adoption of electric mobility by 2030. So with these initial remarks, I'll take a pause. Probably I could ask her more questions.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. John, my next question is for you. You spoke about 5 to 20% utilization of your chargers currently. So, what have been, the sort of key challenges that you have faced in, increasing this utilization and increasing the demand for charging in India? And how can these barriers be addressed?
Yeah, so I think, see, this is not a rocket science, very simple. The chargers utilization increases if there are number of vehicles increases. It's as simple as that. And how would it get it addressed is that once more and more EV gets sold, and how more and more EV would get sold when OEM and customer, they join hand together. So means OEM has to ultimately offer and the vehicle of that quality and of that price, which the customer can pick up. That's the simple thing. And the day that happens, everywhere you'll find the electric vehicle, and automatically all the charging points will have the more utilizations. Besides this, one can keep making efforts that whether the fleet is there, whether individuals are there, all these are your internal marketing exercise. That how do you reach out to the potential customer? So obviously you need to reach out to the customers who is owning the car, reach out to the OEMs. Incidentally, the OEMs generally, and this is not only for electric vehicles, generally OEMs are not sharing their numbers with anyone as it is, right? Similarly, with the customers, there is no way by which you can reach directly to them, and especially for a company like us, where we respect the data privacy, the confidentiality quite a lot. In that case, also these things becomes challenging. But I personally believe that these are the things which will iron out over a time naturally, without making much effort. What is required from the charge point operator, that do you believe in this journey or not? Do you believe that India is going to be EV country or not? If you believe, then you need to have a patience for that. See, I always believe that this is an infrastructure business. An infrastructure business cannot be evaluated as a short-term success. That 2 years, 3 years time, you will start churning money. This will not happen in infrastructure. Infrastructure takes its own time. It has its own gestation period. So what is important is that during this period of time, when the electric vehicle is gradually getting adopted, what are the institutional support the government can give it? And that's where I personally feel the entire subsidy mechanism which the government has formed in India, to me it seems lopsided. This is not really targeted to create really a good infrastructure and enabling ecosystem. The reason being because the subsidy has been linked, it's very complicated structures they have created. That whosoever get the subsidies, what is the amount of subsidy they will get? 70% of which value? From the price discovery, whatever is the lowest value of the charger, of that 70% would be given. Now, whosoever is getting the subsidy now, they don't know how much amount they are going to get back from the government, right? And then they are not giving any subsidy on the electricity infrastructure, which is a very, very required. So I would have suggested to the government, or rather I would suggest to the government, because they have already extended the frame for 2 years, they should restructure the subsidy on the infrastructure side, and they should make it very simple to use, understand, and operate. That whosoever is setting up the charging infrastructures, they are entitled for a subsidy. We have this cap. This is the maximum amount you will get a subsidy. It will be 100% to your capex, subject to this amount. Let's say 20%, 30%, 50%. Now, those expenses includes charger, includes land, includes everything, and it makes it very simple. And you make it eligible to everyone. Now, currently what is happening, because of this complicated formula, they are finding that it is only government agencies, only they can get this subsidy. Because see, any private company which is run by the board cannot work on the expression of interest, on a letter of intent. You don't give any contract. So this entire thing has to be relooked, I believe, if you really want the subsidy to be meaningful.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Lewis, you spoke about interoperability. So we do see a lot of it happening in Europe and obviously in the US and North America. What needs to be done to have those sort of networks, those sort of interoperability systems in place in India? What needs to be done? What has already been done? If you can shed some light on that.
So what is already happening is something which is happening beyond the curtains, if I were to put it. But what needs to happen? Otherwise, I think first let's try and understand why interoperability is important. Otherwise, what you will have is in London, if you were to land in London, you have 42 different apps just in one city for charging infrastructure, of which, of course, give or take 10 maybe operatable. So what this requires is, and we are talking about India, which by itself is 35 countries, if I were to call it. I mean, I'm just, it's each with its own language, with its own unique systems, including the own electricity codes. So what can happen is if there is no commonality which is built in initially, the problems are going to be a lot more critical. And then it's a suboptimal, already there is an infrastructure which is suboptimally utilized. Then you have a platform which is again suboptimal. So what we believe is for interoperability, I think there has to be a kind of discussion which needs to start immediately than later. The technology permits, the technology permissions are in place. It's the standards and guidelines which need to fall in place. However, I totally toe the line is that this needs to be based on what is practical, feasible, and technically possible, rather than an independent assessment which says, hey, this is what it is. Otherwise, the same thing will happen which happened with one of our protocols. And I'm unabashed about saying that the DC001 was something which was mandated, but today it doesn't really stand ground. In the same way, for interoperability, those standards need to fall. And if they don't happen now or within the next 1 year, we will have customer confusion is what I believe. Not only customer confusion, it's also going to make life a lot more difficult for the agencies, the CPO networks. So whether what is happening in the background, the technology exists. So we are investing in some of the, it's called as the OCPI platform for interoperability. Discussions are already in place. We are talking to like-minded network providers, if I were to say, to see how we can work together. But that is absolutely on two companies or three companies coming together thinking we like-minded on this, but there is no standard platform. So I would absolutely encourage everyone to, or the government agencies to start thinking on those lines. And while doing that, please involve not only government agencies, but also the private players who can kind of give a real outcome, the real inputs on how this OCPI / interoperability platforms needs to fall in place for India. It's as, and the best part is, I mean, just yesterday, Honorable Prime Minister announced the fact about the system. It's the e-rupee, right? So we have that platforms in place. We have the finance platforms. The tech platform for charging is already in place. So it's someone coming together and saying, hey, listen, let's put this together and let's make this as India's standard. And then you can, then I think there's the bigger problem of customer having to find the locations, or rather, it's not only about finding locations, it's about operating the charges. So this is what I believe. The start had to happen yesterday, but tomorrow is not yet lost. So if we can start today, at least the discussions can start. And I think India infrastructure can start pushing that kind of a mandate into the individuals who do matter. That's my view.
All right. Thank you. Mr. N. Mohan, my question to you is, what has been EESL's experience in the smart charging space? Do you feel something is happening on that end, or is it still some time away?
So presently, if you look at the business viability of public charging station, it's not a viable business case as on today, because considering the low utilization, less than 10%, it's like somewhat like where the payback periods are getting more longer, and relying completely on the charging the revenues is not a sustainable business for charge point companies. So in Delhi, like we have more than 97 public charging stations. In a city like where we have more number of electric vehicles on the road, still the utilization are not touching more than 10% from last 1.5 years. There are certain factors which are obviously like affecting or impacting the utilization trend. But broadly, if you look at the scenario of the vehicle segment also, so right now the subsidy under the FAME2 scheme for four-wheelers is more allowed for the commercial EV segment. So right now the personal mobility users are not eligible for the FAME2 subsidy. This is one factor I think which is like limiting the adoption of electric vehicles by the personal mobility users. So once we open up the subsidy part to the personal mobility users, we see the utilization could gain a traction for the public charging station also. Like as said by Mr. Avdesh ji also. So India doesn't have that urban infrastructure where the users has a dedicated garage or a parking bay, and most of these vehicles would at least still be parked along the roadside. Definitely, there's a larger need for the public infrastructure if we need to encourage the adoption of electric mobility in the country. So coming back on the requirements for some of the enabling factors, close to 22 states have announced the state EV policies, and these state EV policies have announced the demand incentive for electric vehicles and also for the charging infrastructure. So one of the main gap which I normally see in the policy is like there has to be an operational framework on disbursement of the subsidies. So although the subsidies are allowed in the EV policy, there is no clear mechanism in place on how a charge point operator could claim those state subsidies. If these operational framework could be at least announced and formalized, then many companies like the Magenta Power, like CESL, and even the Photon. So probably I think they can bring in more investment in the charging stations and not completely relying on the central subsidy. So probably we can look at the state subsidy as one of the key elements to at least like partner with the state agency for building up more charging station. So I think the key is like one of the EV policy has to be at least like ensure there's an operational framework to at least like trigger that initial requirement to enabling the basic infrastructure in cities. Secondly, in the collaboration also, I would say, I think it's not about the competition. I think we as a charge point companies, we're looking for more collaborations. So we try to work with multiple the companies. For us, like as a charge point operator, we want our asset to be utilized more. So in a way, like even if I need to collaborate with multiple like-minded partners, we are open to work with like-minded partners. So probably, I think our asset utilization could increase. That is where I think the revenues could be generated, and probably I think that is where it makes a business sense also for charge point companies or even for a network service provider. So we also believe I think there has to be in order to achieve the scalability, the interoperability, and furthermore I would say the democratization of the charging infrastructure. So right now, instead of going for a multiple innovation of charging technologies, so probably we could look at some of the use cases where the existing infra could be used by the different segment of vehicles. So at least we can see there is a model.
Mr. Mohan, can you hear us? I think he's facing some network issues. We'll go back to him when he rejoins. I'll move on to Mr. Jha and Mr. Lewis. Anyone, if you can take this question. So, since both of you have, these software management platforms for EV charging, so what are the sorry, you're back. Please continue.
Sorry, there was some technical.
Please continue with what you were saying.
Yes, these are some of the I think the government is pushing, is putting up this best friend. So, if you look at the recent FAME 2 amendment, there is a hike has been made for the electric two-wheelers from initial 10,000 rupees per kilowatt of battery capacity to 15,000. So obviously this would create at least a demand for electric two-wheelers. So adding to that, states they're also complementing equal amount of subsidy for the two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So we see the initial demand definitely would come up from this low-end segment like two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and definitely the four-wheelers in the heavy-duty segment would be a long-term goal where all charge point operators would be very keen to work on this particular segment.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Jha and Mr. Lewis, maybe you can take this question one by one. What are the sort of services that this software management platform would typically provide, and also going forward, do you sort of see a V2G sort of an integration happening in India? Mr. Jha, maybe.
Yeah. So, see, we need to understand the physics and chemistry of the EV charging. Right? It's unlike the ICE, ICE vehicles where you go and 2 minutes or 3 minutes, the vehicle, the gasoline tank gets filled in. Here, the battery is to be supplied with the energy. And so what it means that it has to be at a voltage level, appropriate voltage level, which is good for the battery itself. So it means there has to be a communication between the battery management system as well as the charger. And at the same time, since there would be a huge number of the charging stations, and especially during the early days when the number of use case is very less, all the charging stations are generally on a do-it-yourself model. So it means there is no manpower deployed at the charging stations. Normally, you will not find. So what essentially does it mean then? Then if a charger is standalone, standing in a public place, so the charger management system should be able to help any operator to manage their entire charging network. So whether the charger is online or offline, they should be able to know from their, the control room itself. They should be able to administer the pricing, that if you want to change any pricing, if you want to create a different pricing mechanism, you should be able to do that. You should be also able to do the remote diagnostics, that what are the problems with the chargers. If any charger is going offline, is it because of the software issues or hardware issues? That requires to be addressed. If it is a software issue, you can reset from the backend itself. But if it's a hardware issue, you can coordinate, you can send the message to your maintenance partner, and they can go and they can attend and bring the charger online. So essentially, what this charger management system does is help the charge point operator to manage the entire network of the charging infrastructure without requirement of any manual intervention beyond the maintenance of the hardware itself. So that's something. But on the front end side, from the consumer side, this plays an important role, because currently when the chargers are getting set up, you don't know where the chargers are. So how would you find the charger? So discovery of the charger location is very important element of the mobile applications. Then once you discover the charger, then you should be able to discover the real-time basis that whether the charger is currently online or offline, or it is occupied by someone. So should I go there or should I not go there? Then you should have the facility of doing the transaction itself. So it means you can go, you can start and stop the charging at your convenience, and also the payment transaction will happen. So you have to have integration with the payment service providers and there are n number of payment service providers which operate under RBI guidelines. So you need to integrate that PSP so that all the digital platform of the payment is provided. Let's say, Max was referring to the e-rupee, which has been recently launched, or the UPI or NEFT or a wallet or credit card, debit card, QR based. All these things can be facilitated to the end user, and on top of this, it should be as seamless as possible. It should not happen that you go and then you do for registrations, you have to do 10 steps. You require 5 minutes to first start the registration itself. So this is what the function of the software, as a service or the software platform is.
All right. And Mr. Lewis, would you agree with him? Do you have something more to add to whatever he said?
Sure. Just one point. This is important to understand. Every technology, this is a new technology setup, so it will go through multiple phases. Like Avdeji said, first is to get the basic infrastructure in place. Then you do add-on services, then value-added services. So right now, what we are grappling is with the level 1 kind of an infrastructure setup and getting the basic things out. And I'll be very upfront about as simple as internet being, because the bottleneck to an entire charging and the charger speaking, this is an entire connected kind of an ecosystem. One slip and the entire ecosystem fails actually, and you have a customer standing there just because his internet is not working. So to that extent, those problems are getting peeled off, solved. So I think what we should expect from the software or the software services right now is level 1. Is that if I go, I should be able to charge. Then there are going to be build up of interesting more services like parking as a service, plus add-on services which will start falling in place. And that expectations will be a gradual build-up. The second point is, interestingly, you mentioned, I think whether it was a question to us or to Mohanji, I don't know, but you talked about the V2G as a vehicle to
Yeah.
your ability to do that. I think if you ask the panelists over here, everyone would agree, yes, it is possible technically. Only there are two constraints. Whether that has been tested, the answer is that it's been tested. First constraint is from the regulatory perspective of infusing back electricity the way solar net metering does. So it's not very difficult, but it's a regulatory framework which needs to fall in place. Second, also the OEMs, it's again power back from the systems, right? So these two things need to fall in place. But from a charging infrastructure perspective, I think we'll be more than happy to see this as a service. But I believe that it's at least a year away from where we'll have some formal setups falling in place. The pilots are going on. I mean, there's interesting pilots going on. So that's my view, just adding on to what Avdeshji said and one of the comments that he made about it.
I'll just have a follow-up question to this. You spoke about V2G being technically possible and pilots are going on. So do we mean to say it's not commercially viable at the moment?
No, that's not about commercials. It's about whenever you're infusing back energy, V2G, I mean, unlike V1G where there is this power in and then you control it, V2G is sending back electricity back to the grid. And whenever you're sending anything back to the grid, you are bound by protocols like islanding, especially from solar, etc. So those regulatory frameworks are not yet in place. Very simply we've done pilots using the existing solar network and trying to see how we can do that. But it's a pilot, done and dusted. I mean, it's possible. It's just the regulatory framework falls in. Till such time, those are not clear. But interestingly, there's something. I see it as an amazing opportunity because India is going all out on solar, be it rooftop, ground mounted. You just infuse it with the electric vehicles and suddenly you have a very different system. Again, here it would require someone to get up, start thinking that, hey, listen, let's put this up right now rather than wait for it later. So that's my take on V2G. So technically possible, regulatory things need to fall in place. It's my way.
Right. Mr. Enman, I have a slightly different question for you, and then we can move on to the audience questions. This is related to range anxiety and time anxiety, like especially for a normal consumer like me planning to buy an EV. There will be two questions. One is regarding range anxiety, when I'll be able to charge it, and also time anxiety, how much time will it take? So just wanted to understand, and I'm getting some questions also from the audience, is our charging infrastructure, the public charging infrastructure, developed in a manner where these two concerns which consumers have can be sort of addressed to some extent, if not totally?
Answer is both yes and no. The
Okay.
reason
Very
is there is defined guidelines by Ministry of Power where it is said like there has to be like one public charging station in a grid of 3 kilometers by 3 kilometers. If you look at a city like Delhi, so they're close to like 222 grid blocks. Means like probably like the charge point operator has to build at least close to 222 charging station to remove that range anxiety for the EV users operating within the city. But when it comes to the case for like the intercity requirement, the scenario would definitely change. There is a guidelines which says like there has to be like one charging station at every 25 kilometers and maybe like higher capacity station at every 100 kilometers of those highways and the express ways. Here the logic is like in India, like we have multiple protocols, as rightly said by Mr. Maxon and Mr. Adeshji also. We have the Bharat DC chargers, which are more compatible for the moderate or the low range electric vehicles which are used by the commercial and shared mobility segment. Then we have the CCS2 connectors, CHAdeMO connectors, which are more for the long range electric vehicles. But as of now in India, like we have more CCS2 compatible electric vehicles where the range is more than 200 kilometers. So these are the uses where these vehicles could be used extensively for the intercity movement rather compared to the earlier the Bharat BC, where the vehicles have a limitation of around say close to 200 kilometers. These are primarily being used for the sharing partners for intra-city movements and for the B2C and B2B segments. But largely we see a business case for higher capacity DC stations, especially with the international charging protocols, where typically people would like to spend say less than a half an hour for a quick top up recharge. And from our experience of operating this charging station, we see the customers doesn't have any hesitation in charging the electric vehicles at public charging stations, and even in the charging time is around say 30 to 45 minutes. The criteria becomes the selection of the charging sites. Whenever you're offering in a charging site which is like within the public parking locations where there's a commercial establishment, but at least the customers can at least like relay or relax for half an hour. It becomes more an easy take from the customers for using those charging station. But definitely apart from these two, like the range anxiety and time anxiety, people also look at the charge anxiety concerns, which is more towards like, will I get a charging station? Will those charging stations be available when I go there? So also like these are completely like controlled through mobile applications where the user can at least like check the availability of the charging station, navigate, and even you can go and initiate the charging and you can discharge the charging facility. But still considering the limitations of the Indian infrastructure, where some of the voltage fluctuations could lead to charger leading to offline situations are quite frequent in some of the cities where the disruptions are much more. And also, like I would comment something on the service capability of the OEMs as well. So although like we're trying to upscale the manufacturing capability, but largely as a charge point operator, my interest is like what is the uptime of those charging stations. So once I build those stations with the investment which are having a longer payback period, I need to ensure like these stations having the maximum uptime. So presently the issues like we're building stations spread across the country and the limitation of service by the OEMs. It's one of the key concern. When the issues comes to like the hardware issues and the software issues, or even this could be the connectivity issues. These kind of issues are hampering the business interest of the charge point operators. And I see the largely, I think the service industry has to grow very fast if the electric mobility has to come up fast in India. It's not about the production or the innovation in the technology. I think it's more on how probably at least we can service those the EV charging stations where the charge point operators have done the investment and complementing the rest limiting effort by both the companies to ensuring that the maximum time these stations are made available to the EV users. So at least we can reduce this concern of the range anxiety and the time anxiety and even the charge anxiety.
All right. Thank you. I'll now move on to audience questions because we have a lot of them. So the first question is from Mr. Prabhakaran Parmeshwaran, who wants to know that is the DC charger cost expected to reduce significantly in coming years? Maybe Mr. Mohan, you can answer this one.
So broadly, I think in DC charger also like, we have one Bharat DC charger, which is like typically a 15 kilowatt capacity, and these are like some 100 volt charging protocols. And we see this technology may not remain for long. So probably like next 5 years, probably this technology would either go in upgradation or probably this would become absolute also. They're considering the limitation of for charging, because here the charging time is much longer. And typically, like these chargers are not very expensive. I would say they're like less than a 2 lakh rupees per charger. But if you look at the higher capacity, like the 50 kilowatt DC charger with CCS2 connectors and CHAdeMO connectors and Type 2 AC connectors, we see, I think, considering the volume of charging infrastructure. So as I said earlier, also that close to like 1 lakh DC fast charging points would come up in India. Considering that volume, definitely we see there is a lot of reduction would happen in these DC fast charging. But we strongly see, I think India should look at localization and local production of these charging station rather than just importing the components and assembling here. Most of the recommendations, I think we need to promote local production. So India could become a manufacturing hub where probably we can start exporting our technology worldwide.
Right. Next question is from Mr. Maxine Lewis, from Mr. Chokalingam. He wants to know that what are the operational challenges in setting up and maintaining a public charging station?
Sure. I'll take that question. Just one point. I'm just adding on to what Mr. Mohan said. I think one of the first important things we need to acknowledge what ESL is doing is to kind of aggregate demands and bring the prices down of hardware, be it the electric vehicles or the chargers, and they have brilliantly done that. And I can see that trend happening. This from a technology and cost of technology perspective, we need to understand one thing. Like mobile phones, however, the cost of technology reduces. The mobile phones cost remain the same as more features get added. Similarly, I think in the charging space, in the chargers, the amount of voltages, the amount of rectification systems will become better. The electronics will become better. But there is not going to be a big drastic, I mean, it's not going to crash, but there's going to be a stabilization. And Mohanji, I'm very happy with the conversation about manufacturing in India. Trust me, I mean, as a very proud Indian, I feel very proud to say at least we started off with the AC chargers, 100% R&D made in India, and we are already exporting. That's something we will look for support as well. Now, coming to the question from Mr. Chokalingam is the challenges. I mean, trust me, if there were no challenges, we wouldn't have been here. Obviously, knows. Mr. Mohan knows, he already talked about some of the challenges with the existing hardware, etc. So the macro level challenges are getting sorted, which is the protocols, whether the business model is there. Now it's coming down to micro level challenges. I think I'll call out what are the challenges we face. One of the challenges we face is the quality of the hardware which is currently available in India, and I'm talking about not the vehicle, I'm talking about the charger itself, because OCPP is a global protocol. Some of the chargers don't align to the full OCPP, and then hence the service KPIs that we have with the clients are not served because someone comes in just because the charger does not malfunctions. So there's one important point we need to understand, and I think everyone needs to invest in it because otherwise we'll be undoing the entire EV ecosystem. A bad experience means he talks to 10 people and says EV chalta nahi hai, right? And we need to stop that. So that's one challenge. Second challenge is so, and the second point I just wanted to mention about is the telecommunications. At this point in time, we are working very closely, but we see because these are chargers at very disparate locations. It's not one place where we can control. So the controllability, the environmental controllability is this. And third was most important part, I think, is the power systems. Whatever we say, we are power surplus, but we are not power quality surplus. And what it means is it's a three-phase system. One phase good. See, the chargers are very safe equipment. Very safe equipment. So any small changes in the power fluctuation, the chargers go into fail-safe mode, which means that every time there's a fluctuation on the grid, the chargers really start to say, hey, listen, I can't do charging. And we are seeing a lot of that happening right now as we grow and spread across India. Some cities it may be better, but in other places, so essentially as a charge point network operator, we are connected by three ecosystems. One is the hardware, second is the telecommunication, third is the power. And either one of them fails, our KPI fails. Right? And I am very sure Avdeshji and Mohanji, they might be taking their head saying, hey, listen, yes, we need to solve it again. So these are a couple of challenges. Charging by itself is yet, I always use this statement, it's a social service as of now. Needs to move into the business service once all of this gets sorted. Yeah, these are a couple of challenges, but it's a great place to be in. I don't want you to, Mr. Chokalingam, to feel, oh no, this is all negative. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Then we have a question from Mr. Ashish Rath. Maybe Mr. Jha can answer this one. He wants to know that where are we currently at getting a unified ecosystem for EV charging stations? I think we did answer this to some extent, but he wants, I guess, more clarity on this. Then he also has a follow-up comment on that as I suppose, there is considerable constraint in everybody's mind about venturing into this sector.
Yeah. So when we talk about the unified ecosystem, there are a couple of areas. What we mean by ecosystem. One is on the regulation side, regulatory side, that there are different, the regulators framing the policies for this EV charging itself, and that is something which, as a industry player, we believe that we have to live with that, because in India we can't wish that we'll have that systems where only one agency will be facilitating everything. So we have to work with that one. And normally, I'm a great fan of this statement that India thrives in chaos. So if we have a more chaotic situations, we accept, because we find our ways, that how to navigate through this maze of the chaos. So having a more regulations, probably, initially for investors, it might give a feeling that, oh, there are too many players but we believe that how to navigate through that. So that is not a problem. Regarding another part of the unified ecosystem, so Max had referred to that, that we have the standard, I would say the plug and socket, the connector type. More or less, we have now settled that on the AC side, it will be on a type 2. On a DC side, it will be a CCS2. That's more or less finality, even though the government of India has given the flexibility to charge point operator that if you have a use case, you can go for a CHAdeMO, you can go for DC001, or you can go for a GBYT or a Tesla proprietary or all. So government has given that flexibility, but industry as a whole is moving towards the simple connector or the unified connector system. So that's another aspect of the ecosystem. And the third aspect, which we have discussed on the interoperability. So obviously this has a different phase, but then over a period of time, we are ultimately moving towards where the other part of the world has moved, is that the roaming platform. So where we will have the roaming, so that one customer will be able to, being a subscriber of one particular CPO, they can go and charge in a different CPOs as well. And the settlement will happen between the different CPOs without affecting the individuals, like the telecom sector. So I think we are right on the right course.
All right. Maybe the next question can be taken by Mr. Lewis, since he was talking about V2G as well. The question is from Mr. Jayant Dabolkar, who wants to know, can we use EV as a battery storage to smoothen the load curve?
Mr. Dabolkar, I think he and I are connected elsewhere as well, but good question. So yes, it can be. So I think it can be done as the load, flattening the load curve, especially when you're talking about solar integration with EV. It's possible. Norway, I think Fortum has been doing a lot of work in that space in the Scandinavian countries. And also there's a lot of work happening in Australia. So the answer is a yes. But like I said, it's the pieces of the puzzle are yet to fall in that. One is basic charging infrastructure, then second is going to be the V2G. Then V2G when V2G happens, the V2G SCADA will need to happen, where the SCADA will start to decide where to pick up the. But one of the important things for that is to also have the smart grid up in place, which we don't have everywhere. So flattening the load curve will only happen when there's an enormous amount of data and the SCADA systems working closely with the smart grids. So I think a lot of, so it is like, it's just the beginning. I think we have a few decades of work lying in front of us. when the new oil is electricity. Everyone understands that. But to Jayant Dabholkarji, the answer is absolutely a yes, can be done. But I don't think we should look at that as an immediate solution yet. That's my answer.
All right. Mr. N. Mohan, the next question is for you. This is not an audience question. This is a question from me. That what role do you foresee the utilities can play in this space? Your comments on that.
Yeah, so just taking the lead from what Maxon said. So right now we are offering charging as a service. Probably, I think in future, probably like even charging is like probably we can offer the grid services to the utilities. So presently like the grid services, which could be like ancillary services, which could be the peak shaving or maybe like providing the load curtailment strategies. So presently, I think it's more like an unidirectional flow of current from the grid to the electric vehicles for recharging the batteries. But down the line, we are seeing a lot of value proposition.
Mr. Chab, I think we've lost Mr. N. Mohan. Okay. Maybe Mr. Jha, you can then take on this next audience questions till we get him back. This is again from Mr. Jayant Dabholkar, who wants to know, can we use data from RTO to decide where to install chargers?
Sorry.
Okay, so Mohan has come back.
Back.
Mohan, guys.
All right. Yeah,
So-
please continue.
Utility, sorry for this interruption. Really.
That's completely fine.
So I think the utility plays a major role because whenever we talk about the charging station, it's the utility which has a major role to play. Right now, I think because if we see the deployment of this charging station, it's not planned with respect to the grid infrastructures. So we may reach a situation where probably like the complete like renovation might required in the utility side. So it's better like at least we plan the deployment in a systematic way, where probably at least we can try to ascertain like what kind of infra is available presently with respect to the spare load availability at those their nearest distribution transformers, with respect to the existing the infra limitations. So I think the planning is more vital before we spread largely across the cities. And even like presently, there is no communication between the charge point operator and the distribution utility. So there is no way probably we can communicate with the distribution utility. Even if I want to share like what is my existing real-time load from this charging station, such information have not been traced back to the distribution utility. I think there is a larger scope where probably I think we can start interacting as a charge point company and the distribution utility, where we can try to match the energy requirements, both when there is a peak demand. So probably I can act as an demand response operator. Probably I can just curtail my existing charging load. So I think still the grid management services has to be enabled, and I think the real-time exchange of information between the CPU and the distribution utility would be a key factor in coming years.
Right. Thank you so much. And with this, we'll close this session. And